Hi, welcome back to Revenge Heat. This story happened in Tucson, Arizona. My name is Brooke Calloway. I'm 31, I work in medical billing, and I have a habit of keeping a running tally in my head of every dollar I spend before I spend it. Groceries, gas, the small stuff. My mom used to say I was born with a calculator where my heart should be. She meant it as a criticism. I've come to think of it as a survival skill. So when my sister called me on a Tuesday night in February, crying so hard I could barely make out the words, I did what I always do when someone I love is in trouble. I stopped calculating and I just said yes. She and her husband had been evicted. Not a surprise, if I'm being honest. My brother-in-law had been between jobs for almost 8 months, and my sister had this talent for describing how she was about to fix something without ever actually fixing it. But hearing her cry like that in my car, I didn't think about any of that. I thought about her at 12 years old, sharing her Halloween candy with me because I dropped mine in the street. I thought about the way she used to leave the bathroom light on for me when I had nightmares. I thought about how she was my sister. "Come stay with me," I said, "just until you get back on your feet." She exhaled like I'd pulled her out of water. "Just a few weeks," she promised. "We'll be out of your hair before you know it." My apartment is 2 bedrooms in a complex near the hospital where half my billing clients work. I sleep in the bigger room. The second one had been my workspace, a desk, a file cabinet, a bookshelf I actually used. I broke it all down, stacked the boxes against my bedroom wall, dragged the pull-out couch from my storage unit, and made it up with the good sheets. My sister cried again when she saw it. Her husband stood in the doorway with his arms crossed and said it was nice of me. My nephew, who had just turned 17, pushed past both of them and dropped his backpack on the floor like he was checking into a hotel. The first week was fine. Almost nice. We ordered pizza, watched movies. My sister seemed lighter. She talked about the bookkeeping course she was going to take online, about picking up shifts at a coffee shop near the complex. Her husband mentioned a job lead. My nephew said very little and spent most of his time on his phone, which I figured was just what 17-year-olds did. The second week, I started to notice things. The refrigerator emptied faster than I filled it. The delivery apps on my phone started showing notifications I hadn't triggered. I figured I'd accidentally left an app logged in on a shared device and made a mental note to check it. I was tired from work. I told myself it could wait. I was at my desk on a Thursday afternoon when my nephew wandered out of the second bedroom and announced, without looking up from his phone, that he'd ordered himself some stuff. "What kind of stuff?" I asked. He shrugged. "Just some things I needed." "Used your account. It's fine." I kept to my voice level. "What account?" He finally looked at me. "Amazon, the one connected to the card on your phone." He said it like I'd asked what color the sky was. "He didn't ask me," I said. He made a face. "It's not a big deal. It was like $40. I let it go. I shouldn't have. But I was tired and $40 felt manageable, and I told myself I'd have the conversation with my sister later that evening about setting clearer expectations. Later that evening, I was on back-to-back client calls until 9. By the time I ate dinner, it was almost 10 and I just wanted to sleep. 3 days after that, I opened my banking app to move money between accounts the way I do every Sunday morning, coffee in hand, routine as brushing my teeth. And I sat there at my kitchen table with my coffee going cold and read through 2 weeks of charges I did not make. It wasn't $40. It was a gaming headset, a limited edition jacket from a streetwear brand I'd never heard of, sneakers that cost more than my car payment, restaurant deliveries to my own address, ordered at times I was at work, a music festival early bird ticket package in a city 3 states away, a subscription box service, a second subscription box service, 3 different in-app purchases from games I'd never downloaded. The total was $5,840. I sat with that number for a long time. The money I'd set aside for my dental work I'd been putting off for 2 years. The deposit I was slowly building toward renting a 1-bedroom with an actual office again. The emergency cushion I kept because medical billing is contract work and contracts end without warning. I didn't slam anything. I put the phone face down on the table. I refilled my coffee even though I didn't want more coffee. And then I went and knocked on the second bedroom door. My sister answered in pajamas. Her husband was on the pullout behind her, watching something on a laptop. My nephew was somewhere in the back, headphones on, likely wearing the headset I had just paid for. "I need to show you something," I said. She looked at the phone I was holding out. Her eyes moved across the screen and I watched her face do something complicated. She scrolled up, scrolled back down. She let out a small laugh that wasn't really a laugh. "Okay, but some of those are probably mistakes," she said. "These apps mess up all the time." "The delivery addresses are this apartment," I said. The confirmation emails went to addresses connected to devices on my Wi-Fi. "The gaming purchases match the games your son plays." She handed the phone back to me. "He's going through a hard time," she said. "We all are. Moving like this, disrupting his whole routine. It's been really stressful for him." I stared at her. "That's almost $6,000. She crossed her arms. "Look, he shouldn't have done it without asking, obviously. But you have a good job. You're not hurting like we are. You know what it's like for a kid to watch his whole life fall apart. He just needed to feel like things were normal." "I needed to feel like my savings account was mine," I said. She sighed like I was the one being unreasonable. "We'll pay you back once things stabilize." Her husband had not moved, had not looked away from the laptop. He did not look up now either. I said goodnight. I went to my room. I closed the door and sat on the edge of my bed listening to the sounds of my apartment, the TV volume someone had turned up, the refrigerator running, a notification sound from the second bedroom, and I understood something I had been refusing to understand for 2 weeks. They did not feel like guests. They felt like residents. And I'd become, without ever agreeing to it, the utility that kept everything running. I opened my laptop. I started with the banking app. I flagged every unauthorized charge and opened disputes on all of them, one by one, with screenshots and dates and the explanation that these purchases were not made by the account holder. Then I went through my phone and removed my payment information from every shared or shared adjacent account. The Amazon account he had helped himself to, logged out, changed the password, removed the saved card. The food delivery apps, same. The App Store, same. Every streaming service that had multiplied like bacteria over the past 2 weeks. I changed the passwords and enabled two-factor authentication tied only to my email. Then I looked up the return policies for every purchase I could still trace. The headset was 12 days old. The sneakers were 9. The jacket had tags still on it. I'd seen it hanging in the second bedroom doorway. The subscription boxes hadn't shipped yet. The festival ticket package was refundable up to 30 days out. It was 1:48 in the morning. I made a list. I didn't sleep much. I was at the bank when it opened. I explained the situation to the fraud specialist calmly and completely. She didn't ask me why my nephew had access to my information. She just processed the paperwork. She said chargebacks could take 10 to 14 business days, but based on the documentation I'd brought, the case looked strong. Then I drove to the electronics store. The headset was in its box under the bed in the second room. I had seen it there when I walked past the open door the night before. I waited until my sister and her husband had taken my nephew to some appointment, confirmed through the window that the parking spot was empty, and let myself into the second room. I found the headset. I found the jacket still tagged on the hook behind the door. I found a pair of the sneakers in a shoebox on the floor, unworn. At the electronics store, the clerk scanned the receipt number I pulled from the email confirmation. No issues. Refund to the original card. At the streetwear shop in the mall, the girl behind the counter raised her eyebrows when I explained I was returning a jacket that had been purchased without my authorization. She started to say something about the return policy. I placed my ID on the counter next to the order confirmation and the bank statement line item, and said I was happy to wait while she called a manager. She didn't call a manager. Refund processed. The sneakers took a little longer. The store associate kept turning them over looking for wear. There wasn't any. Eventually, she processed it too. I was back in my car by 2 in the afternoon. I had recovered $3,300 in refunds, the subscription boxes I'd canceled before they shipped, the festival tickets I submitted a refund request for online. Between what I'd already recovered and the chargebacks in progress, I was going to get most of it back. Not all of it, but most. When I pulled into the parking spot, my nephew was on the steps outside the building. He saw me get out of the car. He saw the store bags in my hand before he realized there was nothing in them, that I was carrying empty bags back from returns, and then I watched it register on his face. He stood up. "What did you do?" "I returned what I could," I said. His voice went up. "That's my stuff. You can't just go into my room and take my stuff. Everything in that room is in my apartment," I said. "Everything purchased on my accounts with my money." He pulled out his phone. "I'm calling my mom." She picked up on the first ring. I heard his voice from where I was standing. By the time I got inside, my sister was already on her way back. She walked in the door 6 minutes later, my brother-in-law behind her, her face tight. "You went through his things," she said. "I returned what was bought with my money without my permission," I said. "While he was gone. While we weren't here." She shook her head. "That's a violation of privacy, Brooke." I almost laughed. I set my keys on the counter. "You'd like to have a conversation about violations?" "This is between you and us," she said, glancing at her son. "We could have worked this out. You didn't have to humiliate him." "He wasn't humiliated," I said. "His shoes were returned. Your feelings about that are yours to manage." My brother-in-law stepped forward for the first time. "Look, things got out of hand, obviously, but the way you're handling this is aggressive. You froze him out of everything overnight. You went through his belongings. That's not how family handles things." I looked at him steadily. Family doesn't spend $6,000 on someone else's card and call it a hard time. He opened his mouth. I kept going. "I want to have a real conversation tonight about what happens from here. Everyone at the table, no phones, no TV. I have some things I need to say and some things I need to hear. Tonight." My sister crossed her arms. "And if we don't want to have that conversation, then I think we already have our answer about how this ends," I said. And I went to my room. That night, after I'd eaten and after the apartment had gone quiet and restless in the way apartments do when everyone is waiting for something difficult, I sat down at the kitchen table and placed a single piece of paper in the center of it, my expenses. Every line: rent, utilities, groceries, my car insurance, my health insurance, the premium I paid to keep my nephew on a plan because his parents couldn't, the increased electric bill, the delivery runs I hadn't ordered, the streaming services that had appeared, the food that left the refrigerator faster than I could fill it. It came to roughly $1,100 more per month than what I'd been spending before they moved in. They sat down. My nephew slouched in his chair and looked at his hands. My sister read the paper twice. My brother-in-law said nothing, but he didn't look away. "I've been covering almost all of this since you moved in," I said. "And I did that because you're my family and you were in a hard spot. But what happened with my accounts wasn't a hard spot. It was a decision. Multiple decisions, made over multiple days, by someone old enough to understand exactly what he was doing." My sister started to say something about stress again. "I'm not finished," I said. She closed her mouth. I laid it out plainly. "No more access to my accounts, devices, or payment information. Period. Not as a punishment, just as what's normal when you live with someone who isn't your parent." I had never given that access, and now it was explicitly revoked. Second, everyone in this apartment over the age of 18 needed to be generating income. I didn't care what kind. Gig work, retail, delivery, whatever. I had looked up every place hiring within 5 miles. I had a list. I would help with applications if they wanted. But I was not going to be the only person in a 4-person household bringing money in. Third, I said, we need a timeline. A real one. Not a vague "a few weeks." I was asking for 60 days. 60 days to find a stable situation. I would help however I reasonably could. But the indefinite, open-ended arrangement we'd been living in was over. My nephew looked up. 60 days is nothing. It's twice what you've had, I said. And you've spent most of that on a music festival you're not going to. He flushed. My sister's voice went soft and careful, the tone she used when she wanted me to feel like I was hurting her. You know we don't have anywhere lined up. That's what 60 days is for, I said. My brother-in-law finally spoke. You're giving us an ultimatum. You understand what you're doing to us. I'm giving you a structure, I said, because the one we had wasn't working for anyone except the people who weren't paying for it. The table went quiet. Not the stunned kind of quiet, the processing kind. My sister looked at the expense sheet for a long time. When she looked up, her eyes were wet, but something in her face had shifted, something I didn't have a name for yet. Okay, she said quietly. My brother-in-law nodded once. He still looked like he'd bitten something bitter. My nephew said nothing, just pushed his chair back and went to the second bedroom and closed the door, not slamming it, which I counted as a small progress. I cleared the table. The next morning, I left the hiring list on the counter. 12 places with notes about shift hours and transit options from our address. My brother-in-law was the first one to look at it. He stood over it for a while with his coffee. He didn't say anything, but he took a picture of it with his phone. My sister put in 2 applications that first week. She told me about it at dinner, almost shy, like she wasn't sure I'd care. I told her I was glad. It was not a dramatic moment. She made pasta, I did the dishes, and we talked about the job listings the way you talk about anything normal. I realized it had been weeks since we'd had a conversation that wasn't about money or tension. My nephew was harder. He spent the first few days after the table conversation oscillating between sullen silence and bursts of resentment that he mostly aimed at walls and closed doors instead of directly at me, which I accepted as a kind of compromise. He filled out 1 application for a grocery store 2 bus stops away. I didn't point out that it had taken a week. I just asked if he wanted help with his resume. He looked at me like I'd said something strange. He said okay. We sat at the kitchen table for an hour and a half. He had more to put on it than he thought. He'd volunteered at an animal shelter for 2 summers before everything fell apart. He was good with computers in the practical way, the kind that comes from actually using them rather than taking a class. He was fluent in 2 languages. He hadn't thought about any of those things as assets. He didn't say thank you when we were done. He took the document and went back to his room. 2 days later, the grocery store called him for an interview. I heard him tell his mom about it from down the hall. His voice was different when he said it. Still guarded, but with something underneath it. Some small thing that wasn't quite pride, but was in the neighborhood. I stood in my kitchen and felt something loosen in my chest that I hadn't fully noticed was tight. The 60 days didn't wrap up neatly. Life doesn't do that. What it did was move. My brother-in-law started picking up delivery shifts 4 nights a week and stopped talking about the job lead that never materialized. My sister got called back for a second interview at an accounting firm that needed someone part-time. My nephew went to his grocery store interview and was hired to start the following Monday. He came home with a schedule printed on a slip of paper. He showed it to me, briefly, like he didn't want to make a whole thing out of it. Good, I said. And I meant it. Around the 40-day mark, my sister sat across from me at the kitchen table after dinner and said she'd found a 2-bedroom unit in a complex 20 minutes away. The rent was manageable if her husband kept up the delivery work and she got the accounting job. She'd put in an application. She wanted to know if I could be a reference. I said yes. There was a long pause. She started to say something and stopped. I know, I said. I do know. She looked at me. I really did think it would just be a few weeks. I believe you, I said, and I think you know why it turned into something else. She nodded slowly. He got loose, she said. I let him. Because everything was so hard and it was easier to let him have things than to fight about it. And then I was defending it because I didn't want to admit I'd let it go too far. I didn't say anything. She already knew all of it. The bank finished processing my disputes over the following weeks. Between the refunds I'd done in person and the chargebacks that went through, I recovered just over $5,000 of the $5,840. I paid the dental bill I'd been putting off. I put the rest back into the deposit fund. It wasn't a clean sweep, but I was whole enough. On the last Saturday before they moved out, my sister and I drove to a farmer's market near the complex and bought ingredients for a real dinner. No delivery, no takeout. She made her chicken thing that I'd always loved and never learned to make myself. My nephew set the table without being asked. My brother-in-law washed every dish afterward. It was ordinary in a way that felt important. When I closed the door the evening they left and stood in my own apartment in the quiet, I noticed things. The refrigerator at the level I'd stocked it. The bathroom counter clear. The second bedroom empty again, ready to become my office once I reassembled it. I sat down on my couch and did not turn on anything. I just sat there for a while. A month later, my nephew texted me, just to say that he'd been promoted to a full-time position at the grocery store and that he was taking a computer course 2 nights a week. No preamble, no context, just the information and then a period. I texted back, "That's real, I'm glad." He didn't reply, which felt exactly right. People talk about family like it's a reason to override your own sense of what's fair, like love is supposed to make the math stop mattering. But the math always matters. The question is only who ends up carrying it. I carried it for almost 3 months before I stopped. And the ending wasn't clean or triumphant. It was just a return to what normal had been before I said yes without thinking first. That's not a sad ending. That's just an honest one. And sometimes honest is the best you're going to get, and it's enough. I think about the night I sat at my kitchen table with a cold cup of coffee and a banking app full of charges I didn't make. And what strikes me now isn't the anger. It's how long the anger took to arrive. There was something else first. A kind of exhaustion that had been building for weeks, the kind that comes not from working hard but from absorbing consequences that belong to other people. That's what entitlement actually costs the person on the receiving end. Not just money. Energy. The slow drain of having to manage someone else's comfort while quietly neglecting your own. What I learned from all of it isn't something I could have read in a book and really understood. You have to live it. My nephew was 17 and genuinely believed on some level that the hardship his family was going through entitled him to things, not because he was malicious, because nobody had ever let a consequence land on him long enough for him to feel its weight. Every time something got hard, someone smoothed it over. His parents mostly, and then me, by extension, by saying yes without conditions, by absorbing the cost of his behavior without naming it as a cost. That's not protection, that's just delay. The consequence doesn't disappear. It just moves, and it moves on to whoever is softest about enforcing it. The moment I stopped being soft about it, things shifted. Not dramatically, not overnight, but the direction changed. My nephew going to that grocery store interview and coming home with the schedule wasn't a miracle. It was just what happens when the alternative runs out. He had ability the whole time. He had 2 languages, real computer skills, 2 summers of volunteer work he'd written off as nothing. He just had no reason to use any of it while convenience was available. I gave him a reason, not by being cruel, by being clear. I think about my sister too, the way she said on one of those last evenings that she'd let things go because fighting about it was harder than allowing it. I understood that. I had done the same thing for weeks before I stopped. There's a kind of intelligence in recognizing your own patterns, and there's a different kind of intelligence in actually changing them. The first one is easier. Most people stop there. My sister got to the second one eventually, and I think she'll carry it forward. I hope so. As for me, what I carry forward is simpler. Saying yes to someone you love is not the same as saying yes to everything they do while they're in your life. Those are separate agreements, and conflating them is where the trouble starts. I loved my sister when I let her family move in. I still loved her when I returned the sneakers and changed the passwords and put the expense sheet on the table. Love doesn't require you to fund someone else's avoidance of reality. It just requires you to be honest about what you're seeing and what you're willing to do about it. The math always matters. The question is only whether you're the one doing it or the one pretending it doesn't exist. I know which one I'd rather be.